Chapter 8 The Return of the Queen. Were the immortal alicorn anywhere else, it would have been impossible for Trixie to even attempt to avoid her. But as it stood, tonight Luna was powerless precisely because she was the princess. Every pony wanted a moment of her time to ask for advice from a being with the wisdom of millennia behind her. Every pony wanted her blessing on some task they wanted to undertake. Every pony wanted to give her some kind of gift, and her accepting it would be taken as a sign of royal approval. But mostly, every pony wanted to simply bask in her presence. It was interesting. Many ponies feared Luna, for her power and for being essentially the physical embodiment of the night. And rare was the pony who didn't have 100 opinions about the night court and the dark, shadowy competitions enacted by the noble herds of Equestria that affected the lives of thousands of ponies, and similar opinions of Luna, who orchestrated the night court to her whims and was often seen as some kind of manipulative schemer who was directing all of Equestria in a game to which only she knew the rules. But on the other hoof, she had just done for them what some ponies were describing as the most beautiful sight of their lives, and up close and personal, Luna seemed surprisingly warm and approachable, which meant every pony except one blue unicorn wanted to approach her, and the blue unicorn was doing a far better job of keeping away from her mentor than she thought she would have been able to manage. Trixie took a deep breath. She had finished clearing out a large space in front of her new home, cordoning it off with a few chairs to use to create an impromptu acting arena. She wished she had a proper stage to work with, but then again, working on street level had its own charm. Or at least that's what her grandpère, Quartermoon, had said about his early days in show business. Not as many ponies would be able to see her, but they would hear her almost as well, and their curiosity would be all the greater. Trixie had a moment of doubt as she stood still, invisibility spell wrapped around her form. Once she had started, there'd be no going back. She didn't fully know what Luna's reaction would be, but it certainly wouldn't be pleasant. Still, Trixie reminded herself that Luna banished her to Ponyville, had dumped her here to rot. Stealing her resolve, Trixie channeled magic through her horn. Fortunately, her invisibility spell did its job of hiding her presence, and she cast 2 spells simultaneously. An illusory bright fireworks, not quite as good as the real thing, but certainly attention-grabbing, and a ghost sound copy of the noise of a fireworks display to accompany it. There was, of course, a crush of ponies nearby anyways, as every pony wanted to be inside the unicorn-created bubble of warm air. Still, she had succeeded at getting a large number of ponies looking her way, eager to see what was coming up next in the night. "Fillies and gentle colts!" Trixie exclaimed, still invisible, as after wrapping another spell around her throat, which would enhance it enough so that every pony nearby would hear it without trouble, she set off more illusory fireworks, these ones streamers that mostly spun in place as a light show. "Come one, come all! Come and see the greatest show in all Equestria! Tonight, on the longest night, see the astounding magical prowess of the one, the only descendant of the legendary Star Swirl the Bearded." Technically, actually, it was Star Swirl's sister-in-law, but the Ponyvillians didn't need to know that. "Trained in the arts of sorcery and spell-shaping by Princess Luna herself, the great and powerful Trixie!" And with that, Trixie threw down a final illusion and let her invisibility spell slip as a bright flash and cerulean smoke filled her staked-out area. The smoke dissipated quickly, leaving only Trixie, clad in her hat and cape, of course, but also wearing a dark blue undershirt and a deep purple jacket with loose sleeves for her front legs, buttoned across her chest and stomach. It was part of what she'd worn to the last Grand Galloping Gala, and fit her theme perfectly. She already had a small crowd of ponies standing in place, ready and waiting for her to live up to her introductory speech. Most particularly, with such an overt and bright display of color and sound, she had attracted what Grandpapa Quartermoon had always claimed was the key to a successful magic show. Foals, little colts and fillies, who were so much easier to fool with sleight of hoof, and always had a much less critical eye. "Now then," Trixie said to the audience, "quick note before we begin. All that?" She waved a hoof behind her as though referencing the light show she had just put on. "Some spells, little illusions, and ghost sounds and flashing lights that any unicorn could do with practice. And I, Trixie, am not saying it was easy. And I'm not saying it wasn't, in its own way, magic. As she turned around, she flicked one hoof, and from seemingly thin air produced a pair of scissors, which she caught with telekinesis. But the really impressive stuff, she said, flicking her other hoof and producing a large white quill. Well, that's what Trixie intends to show you. Trixie produced 4 more items that she had found around her home. A deck of cards, a carrot, a flask, and a pair of silver bits, as well as a sheet of paper and a separate black writing quill. Using her telekinesis, she laid out the first 6 items in front of her, from left to right, in order that she had produced them, so that the scissors were furthest to her right and the bits furthest to her left, while the black quill and paper remained separate from the pile. Smiling at the audience, she wrote a few things on the paper and folded it in half and moved her line of items forward while appraising her modest audience. She smiled when she noticed one filly in particular wrapped in a full-size winter cloak and sitting close to the Grey Pegasus mother. "You there!" Trixie exclaimed, pointing a hoof at Dinky Doo. "Come over here for a minute." The unicorn filly's eyes widened a little as she looked to Ditsy Doo, as though for permission. In response, Ditsy smiled and nudged Dinky with one hoof. The filly trotted forward eagerly at that, stopping on the other side of Trixie's line of items. "Say your name for the audience," Trixie said, waving a hoof at the ponies watching. "Dinky Doo!" the filly exclaimed brightly as she looked at them, though she turned back to Trixie quickly. She leaned forward a little and spoke in a quieter voice next. "I figured out how you made the bit appear on my head." Trixie smiled. "Did you? Well, here's a new one." In a louder voice, and looking more at the audience than Dinky, she continued, "Now then, Dinky Doo, name a number between 1 and 6. 5, Dinky said, eyeing the flask. Five. Trixie spelled out, hoof pointing to the bits first and then moving backwards, until she ended up on the deck of cards. "Oh, thank goodness, I don't know much magic involving carrots." As she said that, she unfolded the piece of paper hovering behind her, showing that she had written deck of cards on it. 2 colts seemed impressed by the trick, but most everyone in the audience seemed underwhelmed. Dinky pouted a little. "That wasn't magic," she objected. "Not really, no," Trixie confirmed as she put the remaining objects on the ground behind her as she used her telekinesis to withdraw the 54 cards within and spread them out in front of Dinky. "Now then, pick a card, any card. Show it to the audience, but do not show the great and powerful Trixie." Dinky considered the cards in front of her with the same kind of weight that an older mare would have given to her wedding dress. At length, she indicated one. Trixie nodded as she pulled the deck together again, shuffling the cards thoroughly as she trotted forward, so that she was next to Dinky Doo. As she did, she flourished her cape slightly. "All right," she said, holding up the deck of cards and looking them over, considering. "The great and powerful Trixie thinks it was..." She reached the end of the deck, looked confused a moment, then stamped her left hoof in realization and pointed. "That one!" Trixie didn't point to the deck at all, but rather straight down at Dinky's hooves. The filly looked down, and her eyes widened as she backed up several paces in surprise at the card lying face down right beneath her right front hoof, which no pony had seen arrive there. There were gasps from the audience as well. Trixie telekinetically lifted up the card, considered its face for a moment before turning it to Dinky and the audience. 7 of clubs? She asked rhetorically. Dinky's face, and that of the surprised audience, told her the answer already. Dinky nodded, as did Trixie, even as she turned back to her piece of paper and unfolded the remainder of it, where she had written 7 of clubs. Cue the hoof stomps, Trixie thought with a small smile, even as the applause came, reserved but appreciative for the adults and the audience, but very enthusiastic from the 15 or 20 fillies and colts watching. Trixie bowed and encouraged Dinky Doo to do likewise before sending her back to her mother. Dinky's brow furrowed in thought as she tried to figure out Trixie's tricks. Good luck, kiddo, Trixie thought with a smirk, as she got ready to pull out the nails and get to more impressive magic. She'd shown herself as competent enough, now it was time to wow the audience. With a wave of her hoof, she pulled from its resting point far behind a stool a bright white ball and a trio of metal cups. Now, Trixie said as she placed the item in front of her, the ball and cups on top of the stool. This is one of the oldest tricks in the book. 1 ball, 3 cups, you all know it. Some of you have probably done it. You know how it works, and where's the fun in that? Trixie hefted 2 of the cups, considering a moment, then shrugged and tossed them over her shoulder, where they had been. 1 ball, 1 cup. Trixie glanced at the audience and saw her. Princess Luna had made her way to the front row of adult ponies just behind the fillies and colts that were making up the front row of her audience. The ponies had noticed her and were bowing in respect, and Luna acknowledged these with a nod even as she sat down on her stomach amidst the foals, offering them a bright smile. Then her gaze was focused entirely on Trixie. Trixie offered a formal, curt bow of her own. Princess Luna, she acknowledged. Trixie, Luna confirmed, bowing her own head. My most faithful student, please don't let me interrupt you more than I already have. Trixie wanted to grimace, but she hid the expression well. All right, she said pleasantly instead. As I was saying, 1 ball, 1 cup. Try to keep up. Quartermoon the Magnificent was considered the greatest magician of his era, and probably the greatest magician to have ever lived, a feat made all the more impressive by his being an earth pony. When he went on stage, with nothing more than his signature top hat, cape, and beard, he'd been able to receive applause. When he brought props to work with, the applause transformed into standing ovations and cries of encore. Trixie was Quartermoon's petite fille, his granddaughter. Growing up with him in the house in New Orleans, Trixie couldn't help but try to pick up his tricks, and she'd always displayed a natural talent for what Quartermoon called real magic. Spells were impressive in their own right, but 1 in 3 ponies in Equestria could not only cast spells, but did so almost every day of their lives. No, to Quartermoon, magic was supposed to be deep and primal, hardly surprising for an earth pony to think as such. But above all else, it had to be wondrous. If one saw an act of magic and yawned or thought of it as ordinary, then it wasn't real magic at all, just a cheap facsimile. Of course, everything that she'd learned from her grandpapa, the sleight of hoof, the art of misdirection, the smoke and mirrors, she was supplementing tonight with her own unicorn spell casting, with her horn carefully hidden under her top hat. No pony had any way of knowing that she was casting a spell, and she made a point of taking off her hat and performing, through pure sleight of hoof, for a good portion of the show. Trixie felt somewhat bad for using spells to supplement her street magic, but her grandpapa himself had said that it was all right for Trixie to do so, as long as the sense of wonder and mystery remained. Plus, while she really was enjoying herself, she was here for a purpose. You want to dump me here? Trixie thought as she finished up another act, this one supplemented by an illusion spell Luna had taught her not 2 months ago. You want to just leave me here and forget about me? Fine, this is how I'll waste your teachings. The magic taught to me by an alicorn, squandered on street magic. Trixie felt herself getting more than a little flustered, though she didn't show it, as the show went on, and Luna had the audacity to not appear angry or incensed or even disappointed. She watched impassively for the most part, her alicorn senses more than capable of keeping up with the sleight of hoof attempts. Once or twice, however, Trixie was able to pull off a stunt that baffled even her. And needless to say, those particular tricks were the ones that got the most applause from the audience, foals and adults alike. Eventually, she ran out of tricks about half an hour before midnight. She had at least closed with a bang, a complicated mix of several illusions and sleight of hoofs that had seemed to make the house behind her outright disappear, proven by shining beams of light straight through it, before returning it. It was her home, after all, she remarked. By now, her crowd had grown to impressive proportions, with her having to pause the show about halfway through to ask for anyone watching to sit on their stomachs in order to ensure that every pony who wanted to see her work could. Fillies and gentle colts, Trixie said with a bow before offering a deep, seemingly gracious one to the princess. Princess Luna, you've all been a wonderful audience, and the great and powerful Trixie looks forward to entertaining you in the future. With that, Trixie threw her front hooves wide, conjuring illusory smoke and a ghost bang noise once more, using the distraction to make her exit straight backwards and into her home. By the time her illusory smoke cleared, no pony could see her. Trixie let out a long, low sigh, standing still with her head pressed against her home's door, eyes closed as she tried to decide whether she was angry, depressed, scared, all 3, or something else. Regardless of how she felt, that was that. She hung up her hat near her door and trotted towards her living room, intent on getting a fire going and just spending the rest of the longest night awaiting the wrath of Princess Luna. "Hello, Trixie." Trixie wasn't even surprised that, on opening the door to her living room, she found herself face to face with Luna. She paused a moment for posterity's sake before making her way in slowly, glaring at her mentor. "Princess," Trixie said once fully inside, bowing. "If you'd give me a moment to get a fire—" One of Luna's eyes twitched, and a blue-hot flame ignited in the empty fireplace. A moment later, Luna levitated a few logs and tinder into place, and let them start burning. It took a few moments, but at length, the fire cooled from blue to a more comfortable red, orange, and yellow as the logs and natural reactions took over from Luna's magic. "She's angry, then," Trixie noted. She sat back on her haunches, staring at Luna and waiting. Luna stared back, her own position matching Trixie's. For some time, the only sound was the cackle of the flames and the occasional snapping sound as the fire found a pocket of moisture or air in the logs. "Is it better," Luna asked at length, her voice carefully neutral, "for a leader of ponies to be loved or be feared?" Trixie blinked a few times. She had not been learning just magic from Luna. She'd been learning rhetoric and politics as well. And that particular question was among the first that Luna had ever posed to her. "Both," Trixie answered, confused at the conversation's turn. "It's best to be both, if possible." "And if it's not? The ability to create such feelings in others can rarely be found together in a single pony." "Then it depends on the pony," Trixie continued. "Some ponies do better with love, some with fear. It depends on the circumstances of the times. Love is more sure, but is outside of a leader's control. Fear is totally within her control, but can lead to—" "Yes, yes," Luna responded, leaning forward. "But whether a leader is loved or feared, what must she always avoid?" "Hate," Trixie responded. "Contempt." Luna nodded, leaning back. "Trixie," she said, "you have spent the last year moaning and complaining without end about not being able to put everything I've taught you to practical use. You have been wasting your time rather than continuing your studies. You have grown arrogant and self-assured about your own abilities, such that you managed to drive away the very, very small number of ponies left in Canterlot willing to give you a chance, and after you melted the Ice Palace in a bout of stupidity, you somehow managed to convince me that it was, in a way, my fault, and that I was squandering your talents, that you were right, that it was time to give you a real job, real responsibility within the Night Court." Luna stood. 2 days. She said, as she began to pace in a long, slow circle around Trixie. "You have been in Ponyville for 2 days, and what have you managed to do? I have been assaulted by ponies all night, Trixie, asking me to intervene in their problems. And can you guess, Trixie, what name has often come up tonight?" Trixie could, but remained stoically silent, staring straight ahead rather than following Luna's pacing form. Luna's eyes narrowed at that. "Your name, of course," Luna continued. "I had one Carrot Top asking for official royal sanction of her food stall tonight because she feared reprisal from the Apple Trust. When I asked her why she dared set up a stall in the first place if she was so afraid, she said that it was because she was blackmailed by you. Next, I was confronted by a weather pony named Raindrops who asked me to officially outlaw weather-for-hire ponies and do extreme things to a certain few in particular. When I asked why, she outlined that you had brought a dozen into town on short notice and, by doing so, essentially told her and her entire weather team that they were incapable of doing their jobs. This was especially stinging at her because it appears that the storm over the Everfree Forest, which the weather-for-hire ponies were brought in to deal with, has dissipated utterly over the past few hours. Following this, I met a unicorn named Rarity who was quarreling with an earth pony, Cheerilee. Rarity alternated between informing me that Cheerilee had ruined everything and apologizing profusely for the decorations. When I remarked that they seemed adequate, she almost fainted, and went on at great length about how they used to be different, showed me her wonderful sketch even, and how you had forced her to change everything for Cheerilee. This despite Cheerilee not asking you to do so. Then there was Lyra Heartstrings, a graduate of my own academy whom I happened to bump into. When I complimented her music, honestly, I was expecting the anthem, and her last-minute change of mind was both surprising and more appropriate, and remarked that I was grateful that at least some ponies seemed to have benefited from your presence. Well, the look on her face told me much of what I needed to know anyway, but at my insistence, she went into detail of how you, by insulting her chosen profession, conned her into playing. Luna's slow pace had brought her full circle to right in front of Trixie. She did not sit back down as she glared at Trixie, the blue unicorn matching it evenly. And lastly, she said, I met the local leader of the Apple Trust, Applejack. She had a lot to say about you, about your trampling over Ponyville traditions, about your challenging the quality of her family's produce, and essentially about you being rude, confrontational, and in all ways unbecoming of a representative of my night court. But there was another recurring theme besides your name, Trixie. Do you know what it was? Trixie remained silent. Luna's scowl deepened, and she spread her wings wide and took several steps forward, getting closer to Trixie. Trixie, answer me, she said evenly. Trixie clenched her teeth. They want me gone, she guessed. Don't they? Immediately, Luna confirmed. She lingered close to Trixie for a moment more before withdrawing, closing her eyes and shaking her head sadly, then wincing a little and rubbing one temple with her hoof. And all that is not aided by the fact that I have had the worst headache I've had in centuries all through the night. After a moment, she turned to look at Trixie. Oh, but that reminds me, your magic show. I am very, very disappointed, Trixie. Trixie suppressed a grin. Why? She asked. You don't think I'm squandering your lessons, do you? No, Luna responded. Trixie's eyes widened at that as Luna continued. In fact, I wish you had hit upon this idea sooner. You are a vain, arrogant, attention-seeking pony, Trixie. But being on stage with ponies watching you and giving you praise is exactly what you need as an outlet for that. Luna turned around to fully regard Trixie. No, what I am disappointed in is that I know you, Trixie. I know you were hoping I would believe that you were wasting your talents, that this wasn't a genuine effort on your part. This was you trying to make me angry. Although don't fear, you have succeeded in doing that. Trixie felt something snap inside her. You're angry? She asked, shouting. Luna's eyes widened a little, as she was clearly trying to remember the last time any pony had dared raise their voice to her. You're angry? You send me here with everything falling to pieces, and you have the gall to be angry. You exile me and— Exile? Luna demanded, her own eyes narrowing as she stomped a hoof down. The room shook a little from the impact, but nothing broke. Trixie, you're the one who demanded more responsibility, and I gave it to you. No, you didn't, Trixie exclaimed, horn glowing brightly as she ripped the former Baron's letter from her cape pocket and hurled it at Luna. The alicorn princess caught it, looking it over. Trixie didn't wait as she stomped around. You send me here with the food being all the same thing, which I know you hate, and the weather spiraling out of control, and the music being handled by the most introverted pony I've ever seen, so that I can suffer for the Ice Palace before I get to spend the rest of my days in this stupid town. You were not banished, Trixie, Luna shouted back as she finished reading the letter. Then why am I here? Because you asked to be, Luna retorted, once more stomping a hoof. Trixie, you have never held any position in the Night Court. What did you expect to be given? A position in Manhattan? Philadelphia? New Orleans? Did you expect me to shower you with land and titles? Ponyville is a large but comparatively quiet town, making it an excellent first appointment. That... Trixie began, then choked on her own words as enlightenment struck her as hard as any lightning bolt. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Having gained the upper hoof, Luna pressed it as she stepped forward. Duke Blueblood, the entire Blueblood family, are entitled overdramatic snobs. But the previous representatives, Trixie began, turning around and rushing from the room. Luna followed, watching as Trixie ran to the office, producing letters from other ponies who had held the title of representative in the past, pulling aside the bookcase and tearing open the safe hidden behind there to produce a dozen more. Trixie levitated them all for Luna to see. They're all the same, she said, though her eyes were wide and her voice shaky. They're all... Trixie, I have used Ponyville as a site for informal banishments. But the difference between exile and opportunity is a thin one, and the fact that I sent you here, inside of Equestria still, was usually more than enough of a hint that they only needed to get their acts together and they could return to Canterlot. She looked over a few of the letters. Many of these ponies were back in my good graces long before their retirements. I do not know why they wrote these letters. Perhaps it became a sort of hazing ritual or sense of vindictiveness lingered. But the Duke said he wasn't vindictive. Yes, Trixie, and because some pony says something, they must be telling the truth, Luna responded dryly. She glared at Trixie. So let me see if I understand your line of reasoning. You trusted some pony who I'm not certain you've ever actually met, when he told you that I exiled you here in a letter written weeks ago. Then because you thought you were exiled, you believed it a good idea to make every pony in Ponyville hate you, and following that, make an attempt to make me angry at you. Trixie's mouth opened and shut a few times as she tried to speak, but no intelligible sound came out. Luna shook her head in disappointment. You owe Ponyville an apology for what you've done, she said, trotting up beside Trixie and using a wing to begin nudging her student towards the door to her office, and from there the door to the residency. You owe several ponies in particular apologies. You owe me an apology, and after that... She looked Trixie in the eye as she opened the door. Outside, the moon sat high in the sky. It was midnight, or close to it. I will have to seriously consider whether, after all of this, anything I have taught you has been absorbed, and whether or not continuing your apprenticeship. Luna's voice trailed off as Trixie continued moving forward mechanically, eyes wide still. It wasn't until she reached her home's front gates that she realized that Luna wasn't beside her anymore. Blinking a few times, she turned to regard her mentor, and found Luna staring wide-eyed herself, straight ahead. Due to the alignment of Trixie's house, it meant she was staring almost perfectly to the east, where, in the far distance, dawn's first light was beginning to creep over the horizon. Wait, Trixie said, her trance-like state of despair shattered. Wait, Princess, why are you raising the sun? I'm not, Luna said in a quiet voice, even as the golden disk appeared fully over the horizon. It was definitely dawn, even as the moon and stars were still perched high in the sky overhead. The sun, in fact, was moving with speed Trixie had never seen the celestial body move at before, charging straight towards the highest point in the sky, as though it intended to shove the moon from orbit. The stars themselves were moving in the sky, hurrying out of the way of the burning orb of fire, clearing a path in the brightening sky. Some of the stars were not fast enough, however. As the sun touched them, they would flare suddenly, and then vanish utterly. Is it really a good idea to have the sun and moon in the sky at the same... Trixie began, looking back to her teacher. Her words died in her throat as she saw the expression on Luna's face. Trixie had seen Luna angry. She'd seen her sad. She'd seen her happy. She'd seen her confused, irritated, tired, excited, enraged, ecstatic, embarrassed, and a million other emotions. But she had never before seen Princess Luna look frightened. And properly speaking, she still hadn't, because to Trixie, Princess Luna did not right now look frightened. Princess Luna looked terrified. Princess, Trixie began, when Luna's eyes snapped shut and her horn glowed. Her form dissolved into blue starry mist and shot away towards the center of Ponyville. Eyes wide, Trixie dashed off after her. Princess Luna arrived in her mist form in the center of town as the sun was nearing the moon, which itself seemed to be either shrinking in the sky or either drawing backwards, moving away from the planet it orbited and making room for the sun, even as its edges appeared to touch the edge of the moon. Most ponies in Ponyville, or indeed Equestria, did not have experience with seeing quite as wide a range of emotions on their princess's face as did Trixie, but even still, none of them had ever expected to see the look of abject terror that was transfixed on Luna's face as her mist form rematerialized in the town's center, eyes darting from pony to pony. Run! Luna exclaimed in volumes she normally reserved for making public proclamations from atop Canterlot's tallest tower. Run, my little ponies! This sunrise is not my doing! Flee to the forest and hide! She was interrupted by a cry of pain, her own, as the sun continued its movement, beginning to eclipse the moon. The moon itself began to blacken, as though being burned by the sun, and though the burns did not physically appear on Luna, her front hooves gave out as she howled at the fiery sensations that felt like they were spreading across her body. Unfortunately, this produced the exact opposite of what she wanted to happen. Ponies began rushing forward to their tormented princess, looking to help her. Screaming in frustration, Luna spread her wings wide, with enough force to shove the ponies back a good 30 feet. "No!" she exclaimed in spite of her pain. "You need to—" The words died on her lips, and there was a hiss and a snapping sound, followed by the air around Ponyville igniting. As Luna watched in horror, a line of yellow and orange flames raced around the edge of town, becoming a wall of fire 50 feet high. Several terrified Pegasi tried to fly over the flames, but they would flare up as they drew near, forcing the Pegasi back. The only sound that could be heard above the cackling of the flames, which at least did not seem to be burning the buildings of Ponyville, was the screams of terror, fright, and confusion. At length, the moon was completely eclipsed by the sun, which flared brightly once, then a second time even brighter, then a third time, so bright as to turn every pony's field of vision white, even Luna's. Then silence. A terrible silence, obviously magically created since every pony was still trying to scream in terror. They only stopped when the futility became obvious and their vision began to return. "My little ponies," a voice broke through the silence as the sound of wings beating steadily in long, slow sweeps permeated the air. "My precious subjects, rejoice!" Every pony, Luna included, looked up at the unnatural midday sky and saw her. A large white alicorn, taller than even Princess Luna, even without her horn, with majestic, swan-like wings beating steadily to perfectly control her descent to the world below, though features beyond that were difficult to make out as she glowed almost as bright as the unnatural sun. At length, she settled down on the cobblestone plaza that surrounded the town hall. Only then, as though touching the earth somehow lessened her, did the glow that permeated her fade, and the ponies could see her in detail. Her mane and tail made from animate flames, her cutie mark of a golden, full sun, her regal, subdued smile, and her eyes completely white, lacking iris, pupil, or anything else that would mar their appearance. "Rejoice!" the alicorn repeated, a broad grin on her face. "Your true queen hath returned." Luna forced herself to her hooves, ignoring the pain she felt all across her body, a pain that was lessening at least, as the moon continued to withdraw from equestrian orbit. She was breathing in great gasps and realized she was trembling in fear. She stopped only with a supreme exertion of effort, and only for the benefit of her ponies. The white alicorn's smile warmed slightly as she regarded Luna. "Ah," she said, taking a few steps forward. "Sister, thou hast grown since last I set eyes upon thee." Luna could utter only a single word in response. "Corona."